Hi, I'm Jeff Nyquist, and this is another edition of Friends and Enemies. And of course, some of the enemies are supposedly what would you say, Alex? Generation Zers hating boomers or whatever. Hey, boomer, you had it easy. We have it hard. I That makes me laugh. The idea that my parents had it easy because it was really easy to buy a house when but my parents' upbringing wasn't easy. What they had to do for work, but
Mm,
my parents had to work for free on their grandparents' farm every summer, picking crops.
yeah,
How do you like that?
yeah. So
Child labor.
yeah, it's very emotional. It's been like this for a while. I mean, we've had the different iterations of a financial crisis, but it's just one big financial crisis. Now we have a massive national debt, consumer debt, housing bubbles, credit card bubbles, student loan bubbles, and so there's not enough buyers anymore for new cars, or not enough buyers for takeout food. It's huge cluster of financial problems, and of course, Russia and China they know that, and some other fanatics they know that, domestic fanatics they know that. There's different groups that want to benefit from this crisis, and they say, well, we should try technocracy. This is what Elon Musk says. Oh, don't worry about money. You don't have to invest. You don't have to worry about the future. We got this all figured out with AI and robotics and blah blah blah. Then there's the fascists. They will happily tell you that fascist economy totally works fine, because it worked for the Germans so well, which it didn't. You got the communists who are saying that the general financial crisis, affordability crisis, perfectly shows that Marx was right about everything. Even though uh, Marx didn't really have any original thought. He just his job was to make people angry and just direct that anger. And you got ultra libertarians, and then of course you have the just trust the system crowd. Just continue on as we always have. Things are going to work themselves out. Let's not really change anything. So this is kind of like where we're at this point. It's very emotional. It's very direct for people. It's very it's like the most daily thing that people experience because
Well, here's a question for you, Alex. Two questions actually. Is every generation destined to live better than the generation before,
well,
or and that's one. Should they live better than the generation
hmm,
before? And then the other question is, will they? Will we do? Can we in the
mhm,
world have a situation where each generation lives better than the one before? Is that
yeah.
even possible?
Well, there's so many factors that can happen, factors that cost money. The Cold War costs money, right? So it's not like we live in a vacuum and it's just you work for the Ford Motor Company or you work for a telecommunications company, you work for some company and then you have kids and they get jobs, corporate jobs, and then it just gets better and better each generation. You may have something like a World War, or you may have something like a Cold War, which costs a lot of money. Um, there's things like in the more modern times, there's things like this whole climate change hysteria. So there's another factor in the minds of people, a factor that says, wait a minute, we can't just have economic growth. We can't just let corporations do their thing. The most important thing is saving the climate, the temperature, so we don't all burn up, we don't all die, and therefore we have to restrict all corporate activity. And so then, of course, it becomes impossible to have the next generation be better off than the last generation, right? So there's real factors that can change the trajectory, like a Cold War, a next World War, something, massive sabotage, massive intelligence failures, and then there can be you could have these virtual phony factors like climate change, like when they say there's this supercomputer in the UK Met Office and they have the software they can predict the future, and so the software says we have to restrict all this economic activity. So there's no universal law. There's no cosmic law that says, of course, every generation needs to be better off than the last. I mean, in a primitive theory, that can be possible if special factors don't necessarily arise. Technology gets better. Certain things are cheaper to make. I mean, we have so much more computing power, way more computing power than we've had in previous generations. We have, I mean, cars are more safe than they used to be. There's a lot of progress there. So in theory, yes, you can have an improvement, but there's all sorts of surprising factors. And so that, I think, makes it so complicated with this affordability crisis. It makes it so difficult because it's this universal blame game, right? It's different. Everybody's different. Everybody has a different backstory. We come from different eras. There's different special factors, and we're all supposed to blame each other for rising prices. And
These things aren't under, the thing is about reality. This is the thing I don't like is reality is not fully under our control. We
yeah,
can control things when it comes to us, your personal choices. There's certain things you can control. But largely in life, guess what? You don't control whether your country goes to war unless you're the president. You don't control whether the economy goes up and down. You're one person. You don't control whether sociologically all these people out there are spoiling their kids and making a bunch of brats, or whether everything's getting so easy that people are pathologically weak
hmm.
or big sissies or crybabies. You can't control that. You can't control if all these crazy people come along saying children can choose their gender. I never had any control over that. If I had control over that, I think I would put them in mental institutions if I had control. See, there's a lot of things. If I had control, you wouldn't want me in control. I wouldn't want me in control. That happened, and that's a good thing. We don't really have control. I think God has the ultimate control, but we don't. And the challenge in life is to be as good as you can be, to develop your character, to make sure that life doesn't break you, but it makes you. You become a better person. That's the challenge in life. But now it seems that if you're a barista at making coffee at Starbucks, and it's the work conditions aren't the best, but it's not a sweatshop. I worked in an electronic sweatshop when I was young. I worked at McDonald's. Definitely not easy working at McDonald's when I was young. I had one of my jobs for a year at McDonald's, I was the janitor, and I was 16 years old, and I had to get up at 3 a.m. on a weekend. Guess what? I worked Saturdays and Sundays, 8 hours, and I had to go in there, and I was the first one. I had a key to the place. I had to do all the windows, clean the floors, scrub the toilets, scrub every single inch of that place so it sparkled before it opened. Every Saturday and Sunday. And guess what? I was in high school.
Yeah.
And that's what I did. And I was dead tired when I'd come home 8.5 hours later, because you get a half-hour break in the middle, which you weren't paid for. But I mean, that was tough. My parents had to, like I say, pick crops when they were kids, work outside in the heat doing physical farm labor, which is not easy. And
It's dangerous.
why did teenagers do it? Because older people, really, their bodies would break down if they did too much of it. They needed young people
So
in those days.
I've seen the same. I mean, literally seen the same kind of things here in Germany. But of course, there's differences, right? There's huge differences between eras and countries. Now, the huge industrialization drive in the U.S. Began around the year 1870, and then it really took off, and it's just, for a while, the German output was like the American output, but then the American output was double, and it was triple, and it was 4 times, and just kept rising and rising. So by the time American workers that worked in car plants. They worked at Ford, they worked at GM. Even the lower paid guys, they could afford really good apartments at the time. They could afford to have a car. They could afford to have space. It wasn't necessarily tiny apartments. They had a standard of living. Whereas at the same time in Germany, a comparable apartment with that size was considered special, or having your own car was considered really special, right? So there's differences in countries and differences in eras, but I've seen these boomers. I've seen boomers that they had their own, they have their own houses, and they could pay off their houses. And the prices
there
at
was
the
a young
time.
lady, by the way.
Yeah,
I didn't pay off my house until I was over 60 years old.
yeah.
You
So
know, and that's normal. So I worked, and by the way, I had a job for 15 years where I worked 50 hours a week. Then I wrote and did podcasts after that work. So I was doing a 60-hour work week, most
yeah,
weeks
and I've
for
seen these
15 years.
peasants, and I've seen these
And
peasants.
I paid off my
Yeah,
house.
these.
How about that? But these people want to have, and I didn't get to buy a house till I was in my 40s. So people, and I was not doing high paid work when I was young because my career got derailed because of what I write about. I wasn't really wanted in academia. I wasn't wanted in the teaching profession because I was an anti-communist, and I was a vocal anti-communist, and that hurt. But for people to say that it's also unfair that they're in their 20s and they can't afford to buy a house, and that they have to work 8 hours a day or they have to work weekends. I was even a union member when I worked for AT&T. I was a union member. We had to work every other Sunday.
Oh boy.
We had to work every other Sunday. And for one of my jobs at the phone company, I had 3 different jobs at the phone company. One job I had was a telephone operator at one point. And every telephone operators in those days, early 80s, they worked every other Sunday. And you got paid time and a half, but you had to work. And the working conditions, you had to take a call every 28 seconds. They called it average work time, AWT. If you didn't, beep operator, can I help you? Beep operator, can I help you? Beep operator, can I help you? Collect call to John, do you accept charges? Beep operator, beep operator. That was your day. You had a 10-minute break every 4 hours. You had a half-hour break. Between the 4-hour segments, that was what you did. Sometimes they would say, our line, we're running over on the line. You have to do overtime, and so that was it.
Yeah.
They get
So
volunteers, but then sometimes no,
yeah,
everybody
and
has to.
I've seen these. The same kind of people. Boomer generation, and they did pay off their houses, and the
I'm a
prices.
boomer, by the way. I'm a
Yeah,
boomer. I was
and
born
so
in
the prices,
1958.
compared to today, the prices back then were good, but these boomers, a lot of these boomers, they started working when they were 14. They could have gone
Yeah,
on with better
yeah.
schooling. They
But
had the grades, they had
they
the
did,
brains, they
yeah.
had the work ethic, but the pressure was you have to
Let me.
start working now.
It's just not true that okay. There were more manufacturing jobs when I was in for teenagers and people in their 20s when I was young, but they were hard to get. They don't understand. To work for General Motors and get that job in those days, $20 an hour was a fortune, right? Because minimum wage when I started working was a buck 90 an hour, right?
Hmm.
So $20 an hour then would be like, $100 an hour now. Now, I had a couple friends who got on with General Motors. That was so rare, very rare. Those people that had got really good jobs, most of them, they weren't these guys who drew the lottery ticket. And today, by the way, there's young people, teenagers, and people in their 20s who get those rare jobs. For me, it was a buck 90 an hour. And then, by the time I'm in my 20s, when I started at the phone company, it was $5 an hour. And you could not own a home on $5 an hour. I'm sorry.
Yeah, of course.
Now, I graduated college. Look, there was the 80s recession. Guess what? I graduated college when the 80s recession began.
Hmm.
Um, the idea that we had it that it was easy to buy a house, no. They had larger down payment amount, large, you had to have a down payment on a house,
Hmm.
and that meant you had to save a lot of money. It depending on where you lived in the country, houses are cheaper in rural depressed areas than they are in
Yeah.
big city areas. It just depended, but it's the same way now. I moved to a
Yeah.
rural in order to buy a house. I moved
I
to a
I
depressed
looked
rural
at some
area.
of these. I looked at some of these numbers. When people say, "Well, back in the day, you had to. I mean, a house would cost you, um, you know, so and so many yearly salaries, right? So you had to have basically the equivalent of a couple of years of a salary. That would be the price of a house. But now it's like double
Yeah.
that. But the houses became bigger. Houses became
Yes,
bigger.
that's
The
right.
places, the location has changed. There's huge differences in that are factors in all of that. And what do people consider a starter home? Sometimes people deliberately confuse a starter home with the average home. And so they have this skewed mindset that your starter home is $400,000 or something like that. No, that's more like you have to have an understanding of what's normal. And as I said, it's not that long ago that the industrialization really happened. When it ramped up in the 1870s. That's not that long ago, right? Then you had like the steel industry, the car industry, oil industry, all these industries, rubber and chemicals. You had these dynasties and all that. But even in the beginning decades of this industrialization drive, working conditions were pretty tough, so really, really tough. And you were not really in a safe work environment. The accidents were horrendous. There were a lot of accidents, and people were just overworked. Then things started to happen. People had more time off. They had disposable income, and that created all these cool things. Suddenly, you had your own car. And when you have your own car, right, you take out your family or your partner or your friends and you just drive somewhere to see something new. And then you stop at a diner. You get these milkshakes. You just go to a restaurant. And so the restaurant could make money. So all the stuff began to happen. But there was no fixed, promised, further development. There was no this ironclad promise. This is how it's always going to be better and better and better. And people had to figure out how to be involved politically. Now, at the same time, when things were getting a lot better, industrial jobs, more spare time, disposable income, right at that time, socialism became a big thing in American politics. It wasn't a thing before, but it became a thing. As I said, the Cold War cost a lot of money, because of the Soviets, it was the communists, fighting all the subversion. That cost a lot of money. And also the societal and economic sabotage from the left, that costs a lot of money too, because we know that from the communists' own writings, if you can't have a violent overthrow immediately or quickly, like in peasant serfdom Russia back in the day, you have to bring the economy to a grinding halt. You have to get everybody fighting about everything. So everybody's blaming everybody. Women, men, old, young, skin pigmentation, whatever. Everybody hates everybody. And you have to sabotage the economy so nothing works anymore. And then there may be a communist takeover. So all these things have to be factored in. When you say this barista example, some people that work as baristas are they're leftists. They're very much on the left. So they supported all the illegal immigration. They supported all this climate change nonsense. All that stuff that cost money and destroyed economic opportunities. The stuff that strangled corporations. Now, of course, you can't blame young people completely for that mess. That would be silly. That would be counterproductive. There was also a bunch of conservatives that wholeheartedly supported the war on terror during the 2000s. Even though when spending went out of control, and the Russians were happy about all that misspending of money, because it
Hmm.
improved the situations of the Russians. And the Russians, of course, the Russians were so heavily involved in 9/11. The Russians were involved in this Islamic terrorism. They're not the only ones involved, but they're seriously involved. So all that
Yeah.
costs money. So there is a certain accountability that we have to talk about when it comes to conservatives that supported this nonsense during the Bush administration. There's an accountability for the leftists that voted for all this stuff, despite the warnings. This is going to cost money.
Yeah.
What do you think
If
is going to
people want
happen?
to know if there's higher taxes and a bigger welfare state, then there's going to be employment conditions are going to be more difficult. Why do they think that all these jobs went to China and Mexico and the Philippines and India? Because everybody had to be an environmentalist. Everyone was afraid for the baby seals. Everybody had to have perfectly clean water and air. And so they passed environmental regulations that made it more difficult to keep the jobs here. And then the taxation, and then you had the attitude of people who didn't want to work really hard. I mean, this is a fact. People, as we go to my generation, they believed in working hard and long hours, and that's a sacrifice. To make money is a sacrifice in the world, and it is. Some people I know. I have a friend who he just wants to work when he needs the money, and then he doesn't want to work, right? And that's a way of life. But you can't complain about that way of
Hmm.
life if you're 40 years old and you don't own a home,
Yeah,
right?
let's use that example of the crying barista. There's different people who work as baristas. Different lives, different personalities, different decisions in life.
Different lifestyles. Yeah.
So one person, maybe someone who worked hard in school, tried to get that college degree, got that college degree, something that's actually useful, that's not complete nonsense. But is it kind of in the wrong state or the wrong city, and couldn't find an entry level position right away. So this person has student loans and is forced to work as a barista until that person finds a real entry level job in this profession that this person has a college degree for. So then some people, they, especially when they're young, they've never been taught really often, sometimes, to properly handle money, so they get into this spiral, right? There's the student loans, then there's taxes. They don't know how to do their taxes, and they think, it's just the IRS won't come after me. They don't care, or they're just instead of figuring out ways to survive, they do the credit card thing. Let's just load up another credit card. Let's load up another credit card. And so they come into this death spiral, and they cannot get out of this death spiral, and eventually they do get tired from some of these jobs, and that makes them incredibly depressed. So these people exist. They didn't want to end up in this death spiral, but they did end up in this death spiral. But then there's also other people that were lazy in school. They thought, well, capitalism gives me enough opportunities, or the welfare state gives me enough opportunities. I can just postpone growing up. I can just postpone it forever, or study something that's completely worthless. And then I have a useless degree, and I have to work as a barista. Some people make horrible life decisions. And, men and women, it's like this classical cliche of the woman in her 20s who never figures her stuff out. And she's always trying to figure out how to actually live, but she never really does. So some of them, they work as baristas, and they end up in a spiral. So there's different people, there's different backgrounds, there's a whole different there's like a whole different set of factors here. And then you see on social media powerful people deciding on what super watch to buy next, or super yacht, or vacationing or having 5 homes, and they're flaunting their wealth, and they're, just keep buying stuff, and they can do whatever they want. And they have special protection. If they get into trouble with the law, they can afford the best lawyers. It's not that many people that are really rich, but social media, you think that there's a lot of these people that are rich. And oftentimes people don't understand what rich really means. If you are a paper millionaire, you have like let's say a $600,000 house paid off. You have some stocks, you have an ETF, you have like a retirement fund, a bit of this, a bit of that. So on paper, you have assets of more than $1 million, but that doesn't mean that this person is a rich person, right? This person cannot just do whatever the person wants. That's not real rich. This is something that we've seen, especially in my country, where they kept lowering the definition of who's actually well off. I think one of the distinctions now, especially when it comes to taxes now, is like, what is it, 68,000 euros before taxes. Before taxes, if you make that, or slightly more than that, you are considered to be better off. So your taxes go up really, really high, like especially income tax and that sort of thing. So then you can think of, okay, there's if you have a serious profession, if you just work more hours and blah 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 blah, you get above that bracket, you get punished for that. And if you dare to go higher than that, make 100,000 a year or 120,000 a year, the government really comes after you, and they take more of your money. So this is kind of how the left has destroyed what was typically German, right? You work, you get paid, you hustle, you grind, you make things happen. At some point, things get easier, but that was made almost impossible. But you cannot just blame capitalism per se for it. You cannot just blame every company for it, every corporation for that. People don't want to make an effort anymore, because if you make more of an effort, you're no better off than the other guy who made a little effort. It's everything's supposed to average out, right? So the guy who's not good at anything, kind of lazy at his job in this country, can almost make the same money after taxes than the guy who's picked something really, really challenging and was really, really grinding. And then you get like these doctors and successful lawyers here. There's not much left after taxes. It's not that much of a difference, right? So why would you try to be a lawyer, or a doctor? It's too much hassle. There's not enough in it, right? So there's so many things that get into this. And but now it's the blame game. So there's boomer hate, and boomer hate is built like anti-Semitism. It's like the boomers are parasites. The boomers, they've had it all on easy mode. The boomers are greedy. The boomers are the problem. Everything's the boomers' fault, and we have to take their stuff. We have to steal their stuff. Maybe put them in work camps or just force them whatever. It's built like anti-Semitism, really. And so then the boomers are told, oh, look at these young kids. They just want to steal your stuff. So you can't trust the younger generations, right? And this is the divide and conquer thing that's going on. Oh, you can't trust anybody above 40 or 50 or 60. Oh, you cannot trust anybody who's younger than 40, right? And it's just that's how people keep blaming each other in a not constructive way. I mean, as I've said, the left has leftist people. They've been voting left for climate change nonsense and migration and all kinds of other nonsense that costs money. Some conservatives, they went all in on the war on terror. That costs a lot of money. So maybe we should be more careful about who we vote for, or what influence you're trying to have on these two political parties. Um, and uh, and so as I said, Russia and China know all this. They know the problems that we have, and they know how to amplify these problems. And also, Western elites know that. They know these problems, and they try to kind of make it work for themselves. They kind of try to lure people back into these subversive kind of ways of thinking, or the normal way of thinking, just keep voting the same thing and hope for the best. So, um, defending against the USSR costs money. Competing with China costs money. Bolstering allies, among NATO, that costs money. So, um, you cannot disregard that and just look at the economy and say, well, the next generation should have been better off, and then the next generation should have been better off. Well, there was such a thing called the Cold War. Um, and so then you also have some of these Western elites. Um, some of these Western elites, these Western elites, they simply love money and control too much. So they have like this more like this old school mindset of that's just, we don't trust the peasants. Peasants are dumb, and you give the peasants a little bit, they cause nothing but trouble. I mean, there's something to that. I mean, it's not like the people are all great. All power to the people, all money to the people. You know what happens when you give people a choice? Communism happens, or fascism happens. They vote for national socialism. That's what happens if you.
Well, what's interesting is Thomas Macaulay, who was one of the great writers, maybe the greatest prose stylist in the 19th century. Lord Macaulay became ennobled because of his talent, and he worked in Parliament. He was a lawyer and a judge. He wrote this letter to a guy that had sent him Thomas Jefferson's biography, and he wasn't very pleased at this biography, and the American was annoyed, and so there's this famous letter from Macaulay saying, "You may be surprised that I'm not an admirer of your Thomas Jefferson," but he said, "Your Constitution is what did he call it? It's all sail and no anchor. It's not a stable thing. You are going to, in the 20th century," and of course he was predicting, or in the 20th or 21st centuries, "your country is going to have a depression." And at least he actually said in the next century, in the 20th century, your country's going to have a depression, and your people are going to vote to consume your seed corn, and you're going to wreck your economy, and you're going to be just like these European countries that you complain about. There's no American exceptionalism, in other words. And I've read that. I've even repeated it in articles I've written many times. I've quoted from it. And there's a truth to it. If people can vote to move wealth from the people who are productive to the people who aren't, they will enable the unproductive to be more unproductive, and the productive will be demoralized, and they will stop working, right? Or there'll be no more productive people. They'll just go to another country. Like, that's what you call a brain drain, right? So you don't want to do that. That's what happened in Britain when they adopted socialism in Britain. You were talking earlier about how it was in the UK. There was a brain drain. You know what? A lot of British, highly educated scientists and skilled people in Britain came to the United States. That was back in the 1960s. We've had a brain drain from your country, Germany. I think not as a big one as from other countries, but we had a lot of Germans coming over here, working in Silicon Valley. We have a brain drain certainly from Russia. I think has suffered a brain drain. So many young people from Russia have left, the ones that were more able. Unless you are like Stalin and you lock everybody into your country, they're going to stay in your country, and they're not going to be able to leave, and they'll be like locked to their desks. You can't leave. You can't escape the country. You have to work for Joseph Vissarionovich, the great, and for the communist system, for the people, for equality, or for the great communist future, depending on which version of socialism you believe in. In the Soviet Union, they didn't really believe in equality, but that's a Western form of socialism. But you get the idea.
Yeah. Uh, there's there's like this self perpetuating cycle of making things worse, right? Um, so so some of the Western elites, they're looking at this whole situation, and they're looking at the population, and they're saying, well, we you know we just we want to reward the super hard workers, the super loyal people to the system, and the highly intelligent, the engineers and blah blah blah. We want to reward them and give them privileges um, tied to extreme levels of loyalty, but we want to still have control over them. And everybody else is not really of interest to us. They're supposed to just work and not have anything. So that's kind of like the old mindset. But then from the other perspective, the average people, they do tend to choose dumb things, to get out of this peasant hell, this seeming modern day peasant serfdom hell. They go with fascism, or they go with socialism, and they just make all these horrendous decisions, and they tend to oftentimes it seems like they're not learning from the winners, they're learning from the losers. The Nazis were losers, and they could only lose. I mean, there was so many, and I'll get to that, especially on the economic side. It was destined to the Nazi system was destined to lose. So why should we learn from the losers, right? Some people, they want to learn from the Soviet Union. They were losers, especially in economic sense. Especially in many ways, the USSR, they were losers. So why would you try to learn from the losers? And it's the same thing with the conventional conspiracy mythology. When people are taught, the affordability crisis is there because of a Jewish conspiracy. So that's like the propaganda that's become a mass phenomenon yet again. It's been a mass phenomenon in the Muslim world for a while, but they didn't really start it. They were kind of late to the party. Started with the left, then it was taken over by the right, and then, of course, the Muslims. And everybody who touched this became a loser or was a loser. A lot of these average leftists, they in France, when they got into this conspiracy mythology, they weakened France with this mythology. They said capitalism is evil. Capitalism is Jewish. Capitalism is this parasitic, mumbo jumbo. That's capitalism is terrible. So that weakened France. It made them more into losers. So then the Germans touched it. The Germans got into it, made them losers, and of course the Muslims, by and large, on a global scale, they kept losing and losing and losing. The Muslims kept losing because they're still stuck in this chase for the non-existent windmills of Zion. So don't learn from the losers. Try to learn from successful people.
Right. Where
So
successful people, normal successful people, are not resentful. There is no. Somebody once said, "There's no sin in a grateful heart." Right. If you're grateful for what you have, if you appreciate what you have, that makes a big difference. And why are people alienated? The modern man, 20th century man, really was living better and better. I mean, there was progress from the 19th century. Life was very hard in the 19th century. The average lifespan of an American man in 1900 was 50 years. That was the average lifespan of an American man. That's not the average lifespan now. I mean, the working conditions the hardships, they're just much less, especially for men, but also for women. So, but what do we're more neurotic, we're more complaining, we're more entitled, we're bigger crybabies, and we are more maladjusted for being better off. It's very strange. And, I've said before on the show, because I'm quoting Eric Voegelin, a German political philosopher, who said that he said, look, the problem, the cause of Nazism and communism that you were talking about, totalitarianism, and this voting for extreme political extremes, he said this is due to alienation. And yes, a barista who is crying because he has to make too many lattes at Starbucks, and he's not making enough money to buy a house when he's 17 years old or 20, whatever. Yeah, he's alienated, um, but that's a measure of a lack of character on his part, because his ancestors worked harder and on average got less and had more problems than he did, and they weren't alienated the way he is, right? He's going to go off and follow Chex and Hinkle, or, become a white supremacist or whatever, which is becoming the fashion now, where young people are going. I don't know in what numbers, but the alienated people, it turns out, are not the people who've objectively had a harder time than people who aren't alienated. And the
So
key factor is your gratitude attitude, as I would like to call it.
yeah, yeah. Was it like the some of the some of the younger people, some of the younger people, they tend to say that, well, the older generations, at least they had hope, at least they had some kind of an optimism, but now there's just pessimism, even though you can't look into the future. We don't have a crystal ball. There's
Look at
no.
robotics. I mean, look at, if robotics answers the promise, and all this AI doesn't destroy us, they're going to have a guaranteed universal income without working
Hmm.
if they wait long enough. I mean, that's where this
Yeah,
robotics is taking us,
yeah, because there
and so
have
you talk
been.
about being
Yeah.
easier. Yeah, I mean, my gosh, that's an amazing thing, to be freed from work, right? Like Karl Marx talked about, oh, we'll be freed from work in the communist future. Um, but I think, and this is the sociologist in me, I don't think this is going to end up working out, because people are going to become pathologically weaker and more neurotic. And from that problem and from the alienation that neuroticism attends, people, narcissism is a big subject, borderline personality. And I think it more comes from spoiling than it comes from hardship. There's people who've suffered hard things. There's post-traumatic stress disorder, but I think that's not what it is. I think there's a problem when life becomes too easy. When people aren't adapted to hardship, which is the normal condition of life, something goes haywire in them. And I think that we have a pathological a culture. I can see it's getting worse. I see the attitudes are getting worse. The alienation brings totalitarianism. I mean, read Hannah Arendt, Eichmann in Jerusalem. Eichmann was a vacuum cleaner salesman who became a colonel
Mm,
in the
mm,
SS that bragged that he'd killed 6 million Jews, right? Um, and was ended up being captured by the Israelis and tried for his crimes. But that there was something in him. He had no proper orientation to life. He had no concern for the truth or what was right or wrong.
mm.
At his base, he didn't. He was a kind of bureaucratic machine man. So every generation, as we're adapting to these tools that we have
Yeah,
created, this culture, we are in danger of being
yeah.
become deformed.
And what happens if
Becoming
the depressed, exhausted barista? What if that person suddenly had control over a group of people? Right? What if that
Oh
person,
my
and
gosh.
I said
Yeah.
there's different types of people that work in these kinds of jobs. It can be the people that made really good choices but ended up there, and there's people that made terrible bad choices, ended up in this position. But there's different kinds of baristas. But when it's like a left wing barista, what if these average people, what if they suddenly were put into a position of control, as they dream about, because this is like what because a lot of politics is based on revenge fantasies and fantasies of control, right? So uh, when somebody dreams of and has that double life, right? During the day works as a barista for some mega corporation, but in his spare time, they fashion themselves as communist warriors and communist revolutionaries. But how would they perform if they were put in charge, or if they would have some kind of influence over a new system? We've seen that in the USSR. We've seen that in other places that had communism. It's not a given that these are the good guys per se. It's not. If somebody is down on his luck and has credit card debt and works as a barista, it doesn't mean that person is automatically a good person who would make the right choices, or who would be competent enough to make better choices. If this person was in charge of something, and so this is why elites in the West, elites they've had this mentality of, we're the elite, and these peasants down there, they would destroy everything. If you give the peasants too much, they destroy everything, because they're emotional, they're dumb, they're not educated enough, they're just driven by passions and groupthink. So if we give them too much, everything breaks down. So we have to take from them and control them. And so it's like this back and forth. So the peasants will say, we're treated like garbage. We need to hate everybody with money. We need to hate these people, and we need to overthrow everything. So then in turn, the elites feel vindicated and say, look at what these peasants are saying. Look at how these peasants are thinking. How many people joked about these assassination attempts against Donald Trump, or Charlie Kirk? It's all big fun to them. It's satisfying to them. These are the good guys now. These people that joke about this, they would. How many other assassinations would they applaud? So it's like, of course, these elites don't trust the peasants. So we have to get out of this madness, and before things become really derail here. So subversive movements want to benefit from the affordability crisis. So we have communism. They claim that Marx was right. You could see it everywhere. The price of a burrito shows that Marx was right. The prices of medical insurance and the bonus payments, everything is evidence that Marx was right, they say. And so they say a revolution is necessary to spread around the wealth, but leftists can't have a large system producing essential things without a horrible dictatorship and exploitation. And then there's a sub-variant of communism, which is like the green socialism, and they say it's not just all based on Marx. We're compatible with Marx, but ultimately it's about saving the environment. So it's not just demand and supply and demand and setting prices, and producing what people want or what people need, but it's what's good for the earth first. So that's kind of what subversive people they tell those who are suffering in this affordability crisis.
Yeah.
Then we got
Well,
fascism.
and the thing is the people, they also aren't educated. They haven't, reading is kind of suffering. To get in your head into a book takes time out of your day, but it also requires concentration and thinking about it. You just don't speed read through it and then you somehow absorb it. And there's good things to absorb in books, but you have to think about it. You have to digest it. You have to take your time with it. And if it's a great book, which is what people should read, is good literature and great writing about history and philosophy, it really adds to you as a person. But now in our system, all these people who have no thoughts or serious background in anything serious are pontificating all over the place, and there's a kind of pollution of it,
Yeah,
right?
they
And
want to
they
be
don't
able
know
to
their
they
place.
want to be able to change the world, but they can't even read a
Yeah,
book.
no, they can't. And it's like,
How can you
yeah,
change the world if you cannot bring yourself to pick a decent book and actually read it from start to finish?
yeah. Well, Jordan Peterson has a thing: make your bed first before you go to change the world, right? But it's really look, making your bed. It's reading. It's doing something serious to improve your mind is really the important thing. And of course, discipline. Not living in a complete mess in a pigsty. That also has its advantages. But
Yeah.
yes, there needs to be some order and discipline in
Yeah, and
life.
let's not forget something. This is something I'm currently writing about. This is kind of my next book project. When you talk about privileged elites hundreds of years ago, right? So not the peasants, working the fields, but aristocrats, privileged aristocrats. They were forced to grind hard because this is how elites were built. This is how they figured out they could function and perpetuate and plan ahead the next 50 years of the empire, the next 100 years of the empire. They had to be tough among the leadership as well and encourage a very, very strong work ethic. And they would promote people who were willing to grind for the leadership group, and who were actually sometimes even in constant physical danger. Um, they would lead military campaigns or do espionage or both, and just expose themselves, take great risks for the group, grind, like really risk their lives, risk their health for the group, and then they would get promoted. And so if you're not a competent leadership group, you let your sons, your daughters slack. Just you let them become crazy and lazy and unproductive, and then of course a leadership group falls apart very quickly. So that's why even privileged people were required to grind super hard. It's not that common that it's not that common that rich people can just relax all day, even if they have already made money. This is something that you see a lot, even in the current day and age uh, when you get to be a multimillionaire, but there's still a lot of pressure on you for a long time, and you cannot just let go. Oftentimes, especially when it's above just a couple of million. When you're into the tens of millions, there's so much pressure that you keep performing, right? So
Yeah.
it's not like rich people have it so easy or had it so easy. Some
Well,
of them
no,
they
I mean the people in my family that I've known that are related to me, and I have someone in my family who he's a millionaire. He's around my age, but my gosh, he worked from the time he
hmm,
was a kid. He worked his whole life, worked in the family business, and long hours, long hours. Still works long hours. I mean, uh, he's he's past 65 and he's still working full time. Yeah. So it's not like a government job where it's fairly easy and it's 65, you get this beautiful retirement, right? I mean, so people who have things have responsibility. They have to do their taxes. They have to do, and they pay a lot of taxes. They're the people that support the country, and they do work terribly hard, and
yeah.
they make sacrifices. People, life is about losing, and it's about sacrificing. And think about this: you lose your childhood, you lose your youth, you lose your innocence, you lose your um, different things as you get older. You lose your parents, you lose your free time, you lose uh, a lot of things as you get older. And it's a process of losing. And then you find out, oh, I'm not God. I don't get whatever I want. What do they think this is here? What do they think the world is? What did they promise them? Somehow they gave them some false promises. What life was, you
Yeah.
know.
Yeah. I mean,
It's
you get,
I am just amazed. I just
yeah.
I
And
can't
also,
believe it.
yeah, and also something that's very very different is also something that I strongly emphasize in my next book audiobook project. Leadership groups, especially in the West, leadership groups in the West, they have figured out loyalty over time. It wasn't always like this. It was lessons
Not
learned.
the fake loyalty that many people fake, the
Yeah,
real
it's
loyalty.
lessons learned. Lessons learned from the Greek Empire, the Roman Empire, and other past empires that had these huge problems with infighting. But eventually, especially in the Anglo realm, they figured out loyalty and they figured out how to systemize it and not just with family relations that you were expected to marry into a certain group of families, but also kind of this friendship and bonding through fun activities and just avoiding unnecessary tension, right? Unnecessary conflict. So this is why this is one of the many reasons that Freemasonry was built, just to reduce friction, right? So just to have to create sort of a cadre of people that actually enjoy each other's company, right? So this is why they had all these rules: who gets to be a member of a new lodge, and just try to be professional about socializing, right? And picking specific character traits so it would all work out. So they figured out loyalty, but the peasants really haven't figured it out yet. And this is one of the biggest problems I think that's holding people back, because if you are in the middle of this affordability crisis, right? If you are already in a death spiral or you're getting there, what really can get you out of there, what really can get you out of this mess, besides effort, is other people, loyalty that goes back and forth. Some people were surprised to figure out that church communities help you out a lot, and there's a lot of private, charities, and there's a lot of things that can actually help you. And if people get together, I mean, this is like when you have great roommates or you have a really great partner, and
Community, friends.
you're loyal with that
Yeah.
partner, because if you want a house, I mean, it's in Germany right now, right? If you want the typical house that's like $500,000, that's like the typical house that people want, right? So it's the sticker price is, let's say, $500,000 or 600,000 roundabout, right? You go to a bank and you say, I have a bit of a down payment, so what's the loan gonna be? So the bank says the monthly rate for this house, for this loan, the monthly rate is gonna be €2,500. But because of all the extra costs of paying off a house, all this extra stuff, we require you to have a household income of 3 times as much after taxes. So
That's
so
the
the whole
same in the US.
so the
That's the
whole
way it
household.
was when I bought
So
my first house. Yeah.
if you're left with let's say 5,000 after taxes, they won't give you the loan because you need 7.5. You need 7,500 after taxes to get that 2,500 loan. So who actually makes, as a single person, who actually gets 7.5? Who actually gets 7,500 euros after taxes? Because of the heavy taxation here, you would have to make 15,000 a month. In many cases, 15,000 a month to end up with 7.5 roundabout after taxes as a single person, because you get punished because you're one of the rich guys, even though you're not really rich. So, it's in the American realm. That's not, I mean, making 15,000 a month is really good. It's really serious, but it's not that uncommon in America. It's pretty uncommon here. If you're a doctor in the U.S., you make serious money. A good lawyer, you make serious money in the U.S.
Yeah.
Here, not so much. Even people who are in management, corporate, they make 150,000 a year before taxes, or 160, 180 before taxes. Americans in corporate, they would laugh at that. Doctors would laugh at what doctors make here. American lawyers would laugh at what German lawyers make. So you can't get a house unless you have a partner. But the potential partners, they're not loyal. See, that's the problem. See, that's why loyalty is so important, right? Can you imagine having kids with another person, another peasant, having kids for 18 years plus, and pay off the bank loan for 20, 30 years with the same person? Even people are so hilariously illoyal among the commoners, the peasants.
Yeah, that's what people don't understand is marriage. They looked at poverty. This is years ago, and since people aren't getting married, they're not a team. They don't have as much. When two people are loyal and they're together, they accumulate. They become successful. Usually, married couples become more successful and single people all by themselves. It's a different ball game. And since most people now are single and there's this big alienation between the sexes, and then divorce, you get plundered, literally.
Yeah.
I mean, the wife ends up on the welfare rolls or getting, food stamps and handouts and stuff. And the husband ends up, I was shocked. A state person who was in charge of certain things in the California government that I knew told me one day, she said, "I'm shocked. I made this horrifying discovery. There's men that are working full-time jobs and they're living in homeless shelters because their child support and their alimony payments to their wives, they can't afford an apartment." Right?
Yeah.
I mean, that's the thing about that. They could have, as a family, by pulling together, they could own a house or have a better apartment or whatever. Divorce, they're on the state. We're paying for them with our taxes.
Yeah. So you would have to ask a barista. And there's different baristas for different reasons. You would have to ask a depressed barista, okay, what's your support network? Are you a member of a church community? What are your friends like? What friends do you pick? What about family members? What about roommates? What about friends? Who do you hang with? Because it's so important. It's so important, and learn from the winners. The winners, they figured out loyalty. But look at some of these poor baristas, especially the left-wing baristas, right? But it's also a growing thing among the poor right-wingers. They're so emotional, and they will hate everybody. They will hate someone for not agreeing with them politically on something they don't understand themselves. They heard on the internet. It's everything. Oh, with the if it's the COVID thing, or it's Ukraine, or if it's Trump or anti-Trump or left or climate, they will immediately treat a person like dirt, or consider a person to be dirt for a disagreement. And so how do you expect to get out of this financial mess? How do you get out of this affordability crisis that you experience, right? Because you can't radicalize your way out of this. That's I mean, what was the biggest threat for a leftist? Another leftist, historically. What's the biggest problem, or who is the biggest oppressor of German fascists? German fascists. You know how oppressed you were in the Nazi system? I mean, the Nazi leadership was bragging about this. Oh, they'll never be free again. From the moment they're little kids, we get them in the Hitler Youth, and then they have this service and that service and that service, and then we make them work, or we send them to a war. This person will never be free. This person will never be free. And if that person had been in the Nazi movement early, yeah, we like him as a comrade. But if it was just a normal guy that came in late, we'll just exploit him. We'll just exploit that guy. So this is like the thing with communists and modern day fascists and other subversive groups that try to benefit from the affordability crisis. They try to benefit politically from it. these are not loyal movements. These are not loyal movements. You get backstabbed so hard in these movements, and it's like it's a race for the money. I mean, look at Hassan Piker. Look at the clothing he wears and the jewelry and the money he likes. Or look at some of these German super right wingers, these German politicians nowadays from the super right wing party. They love money. Oh, they love money so hard. They wanna be in bed with the Chinese so hard for the money. Yeah, you heard me right. Right wingers want to be in bed with the Chinese, for money. Or the Russians. Oh, they want to visit Russia so much. They love Russia so much because Russia has still some money left, or there's money to be made. And it's like it was almost comical in this modern right wing party here how these people would fight over political positions. Do you get to be one of the members of parliament? The state or federal. They were beating it. Sometimes they were beating each other up. They were suing each other. They were harassing each other just to get into that. Yeah. They would, and now there's this big whining going on because there's secret networks in this party. Some of them are Russian affiliated. Some are Anglo affiliated, and there's espionage going on everywhere, and so they're complaining about all these hidden networks that make or break careers. Everybody wants to cheat. Everybody wants to get ahead over the comrade because screw the comrade, right? So this is why we cannot get out of this affordability crisis. We cannot get out of it through communist activism or fascist activism. I mean, the Nazis, the Nazis tried to copy Rome somewhat, but replaced aristocracy with a mass political party of idiots. And all of this was in the modern era of industry and finance. Now, acting tough isn't enough. Being brutal isn't enough. The Nazis demonstrated traits and behaviors which they claimed were Jewish traits. Control freaks, tiny elite exploiting everyone else, indulging in overspending for vanity projects. And the Nazis also had green projects. So
following Germany's Messiah, right? They had their own.
Yeah, the
Messiah.
chosen ones. Yeah, and of course the Germans, the Nazis consider themselves to be
the chosen ones. Yeah, they're God's favorite people. Look, it's so funny here. Why did they hate the Jews so much? Well, they wanted to be Jews. It seems like they had a Messiah. They were the chosen people, right?
I mean, there was an affordability crisis for a long time on German territories, right? I mean, there was an affordability crisis before World War I. There was an affordability crisis after World War I. There was an affordability crisis during World War II. And it goes on and on and on.
It's why we have so many Germans in the United States. Many Germans, because were living in working conditions in Germany, they moved to America.
Yeah, and a lot
in many European countries. Yeah,
yeah, and so a lot of some Germans they wanted to do the right thing, especially after World War One. They wanted to do the right thing. So then you had these joint ventures. AEG was kind of, I think it was tied to General Electric, or Ford. The Ford Motor Company had plants on German soil. General Motors had a joint venture with Opel cars. Standard Oil had business over here. So there was like this idea that we could learn from the winners. We could learn from the Americans because they have better apartments, they have cars, and they have disposable income. But there was still this affordability crisis on German soil, and radicalism was everywhere. Communists were everywhere, fascists were everywhere, and the traditional conspiracy mythology was everywhere, which was not just a tool of the right, but was also a tool of the left, and had initially been a tool of the left. So this is kind of what we're seeing now in America, affordability crisis plus leftist craziness and extreme right-wing craziness. And these people over here, they ended up losing. They didn't win. They didn't fix the affordability crisis. They didn't win anything. These people, they lost. The common people, they lost. So another thing that's supposed to fix the affordability crisis now Another thing is technocracy. Elon Musk promises a grandiose future. So robotics, AI, blah, blah, blah. We're getting free money and we don't have to work as much. His grandfather was in a technocratic movement. And so running a country, managing an economy and security are sciences by themselves, and they of course they rely on scientists. So it's not really new it's not really something new if people say, well, we need science, duh. But when it comes to Elon and some of his friends, they used to party with Epstein or wanted to be with the wildest, join the wildest parties of Epstein, according to these emails. So are we really supposed to buy the cat in the bag, right? Because science is not really new, and we already saw some of the problems within the British Empire when we had some problematic dynasties recruiting scientists. So even if some of the dynasties they were too self-centered, and they said, well, we're not that good at science actually, but we can recruit scientists. But is that really ruled by scientists? No, it's just you're using scientists. So we've had that before. And also, if you look at Russia in recent history, if you look at China in recent history, they also reward high IQs. They filter, they look for children with high IQs. And another thing with the crying barista. I mean, how many people are left wing, but they're kind of glossing over the exploitation that was going on for so long in communist China. The factory workers, the horrendously exploited in China, the peasants that still exist, the farming people that are just super poor. And also the sort of fake middle class that they have in China, and some of the upper fake middle class they have in China, these tiger moms. If you're privileged by the party, you're expected to drill your children. They have to learn just a couple of foreign languages, and they have to learn musical instruments. They're expected to work from sunset to sundown, forced by these tiger moms to stay part of this ruling class. So you can't have the cake and eat it too. You're for socialism, you're gonna get that. Then of course we have got the hardcore libertarians. They want to lead us into salvation out of the affordability crisis. And then of course, we got some of these elitists in the West and their offshore structure. They have this offshore system, with the City of London and the Jersey Island and the British Virgin Islands and these islands and that islands, or Delaware. They have these special constructs, and if you're a member of the club, you don't really pay taxes. And I think this is one of the biggest problems of them all. And this is fixable. But you're not gonna get to the core of the issue if you start hating the guy who has $1 million in assets, or the guy who has $2 million in assets, or the boomer who has cancer and has $3 million in assets. If you hate these guys, you want to steal from these guys, you're not going to touch this offshore system that exists, that has been essentially developed as a technique by the British Empire. And wasn't America supposed to be independent from Britain? Wasn't this supposed to be something new? And then you get some of these American elites. They always just want to copy British Empire, and lord over the peasants. So there's that too. And some of these people with money, they're thinking, oh my God, we have an affordability crisis. The peasants cannot afford to live. So what do? Us rich people with money, we'll pay for, communist propaganda. We'll pay for fascist propaganda. We'll pay for conspiracy propaganda, because it will get these peasants nowhere. It will not get these peasants everywhere. But doing so can lead to grave consequences if this gets out of control. If too many people become communists, too many people become fascists, or proponents of classical conspiracy mythology, these things go off the rail. So that's kind of a big thing when rich people want to stay rich and finance this garbage, so the peasants will eat it up and the peasants will go in circles, right? I got some notes here. It's a standard of living comparison between the US and Russia, because there are these arguments, right? The Russians are doing it better. Russia is doing great. Russia is better than the US. Russia is going to save the world from the big Satan, which is currently in America, supposedly. So if you do a standard of living comparison and you look at how people live, what apartments, houses, cars, refrigerators, medical services, you could do a comparison like this. But there's things that are not included yet in that calculation. Financial firepower of the system that you're in. How much financial firepower does it have? Military supremacy. Can your system afford that? Can your system afford to support foreign allies? And what's also not in this calculation, in this comparison, what's not included is Russian access to Western markets for a long time. If that hadn't been the case, standard of living in Russia today would be much worse, because most technology in Russia was bought from the West, and we bought their gas and oil and things of that nature. So if we hadn't propped up the system over there, the Russian standard of living would be much worse than it is today. So when you look at as I said, the houses, living spaces, cars, you have to look closely. Americans, there's way more living space for Americans. We can say that. The quality of goods, if you have a 10-year-old American car that's well maintained, that's better than a 10-year-old average Russian car that's badly maintained. The number of cars per family, or the number of cars per 1,000 people, that's a huge difference. The housing quality, do you live in a modern apartment or something that's built in a Soviet era? Here's a comparison. Russia had about 331 passenger cars per 1,000 inhabitants as of January of this year. United States, completely different. That's about 850 registered vehicles per 1,000 inhabitants. And that includes trucks, SUVs, all kinds of stuff. So Americans have better cars, bigger cars. After the Ukraine war, Western manufacturers withdrew or reduced operations in Russia, and Chinese manufacturers rapidly occupied the market. In 2024, 8 of Russia's 10 leading new car brands were Chinese. So the Russians have an affordability crisis too, right, Jeff? I mean, but you can't do the same stuff that you can over here. You cannot complain the same way. You cannot organize the same way.
It's much worse in Russia. Look, it's hard to get good food in Russia, and I've talked to Russians about this. The food is adulterated, a lot of it. Food prices are low. I mean, Russians live on $400 to $700 a month, but the economy, of course, it works different, so it's not really, can't be compared measurement wise. But the prosperity in Russia largely exists in Leningrad and St. Petersburg. The rest of the country is just
Garbage,
freaking poor, miserably poor. And the quality of the water, the quality of the food, the quality of life is just really bad. And in fact, before the Soviet Union collapsed, South African blacks had a higher quality of life than Russians in the
Oh boy.
Soviet Union, the average Russian. Yeah.
Yeah,
People
I mean,
don't realize.
yeah, I mean, as I said, if it hadn't been for all these technology sales, the picture over there in Russia would be even a lot bleaker uh, today. So they're doing better than they would have been doing. You know, because of they're doing better than they would have done because of us. And I've had some comparisons in the past. I talked about cars in the Soviet Union. These dinky little you know really super bad cars that they made in the Soviet Union. And at the same time in America they had cars like the Jeep Grand Wagoneer. They had power steering. They had climate control in the cars already. They were spacious. They had power. They were fun to drive, and people loved them. This is like Americans, they really like their cars. If it's like a big family SUV, they grow attached to this car. This is part of the memories. This is part of the memories that you make with a vehicle. But in the Soviet Union, this was just a cheap tool, an ugly cheap tool that reminded you of how bad the system was, and you had to wait a long time to get one. A very long time to get one. You couldn't just walk into a car dealership and say, "Hey, what do you got on the lot?" "Oh, I'll pick this one. I'll pick that one." You had to wait. You got a crappy car. And that was in Soviet East Germany. That was still better than most parts of the Soviet Union, where you couldn't get a car, or you would get a much older car. And so the Russians, the Russian way of doing things, it's not going to fix our affordability crisis, and it's just going to get worse over there, because if they mobilize more troops, if they have another recruitment wave or an actual mobilization, that's going to eat up more money. So more affordability crisis, and we'll see how the Russian state will deal with that. I mean, I've heard this thing recently. I haven't really had time to look more into that. This is when supposedly in China, when you're old and you're past retirement, most people actually continue to work after retirement because the system cannot afford people to retire. But what happens when somebody's too old to work anything and too sick, and the children cannot take care of that old person anymore? Supposedly there's this thing when people when these old people they poison themselves. They just choose to die. And it's I have to look more into that, because it's something that's supposed to have been going on for a while among the poorer Chinese and the poorer peasants. And that's kind of the communist way of doing things. You're no longer useful to the system. You are discarded. You're very much discarded. Now, when people say fascism, right? Nick Fuentes and others, they kind of watched a few YouTube videos and they think now fascism is the thing. Fascism is the answer. It's going to get us out of the affordability crisis. It's going to make everything better and fairer. What about the weaknesses, the severe weaknesses of the fascist German economy? There's books about this. There's like Wages of Destruction. That's a good book about this, right? There were a lot of weaknesses, a lot of them, and the list is very, very long, actually. So there was dependence on imported raw materials. Germany lacked sufficient domestic supplies of oil, natural rubber, many non-ferrous metals, high-grade iron ore, and some foodstuffs. So synthetic fuel and synthetic rubber helped, but they were expensive and could not fully solve the problem. This made Germany vulnerable to blockade made access to Romanian oil, Swedish iron ore, and later occupied territories strategically important. But that meant you had to actually have physical control over Sweden or parts of Sweden or Romania, which gets really more complicated and expensive. So you need more iron and oil and rubber and all of those things to defend this. That was one. Chronic foreign exchange shortage. Germany needed imports but did not export enough freely usable currency to pay for everything it wanted. So so there were mechanisms to deal with this, but it was very inflexible. Rearmament outran the civilian economy. Fewer resources for housing, consumer goods, civilian machinery, and household consumption. Living standards improved much less than headline industrial production suggested. So this was a deliberate shifting of resources towards war. Obviously. So then labor shortages. So you go from high unemployment rates to labor shortages. So by 1938 or 39, Germany was no longer suffering from mass unemployment. It was suffering from shortages of skilled workers. Conscription removed men from industry, while rearmament increased demand for labor. The regime later compensated with women, foreign workers, forced laborers, and concentration camp labor, but these were not equivalent substitutes for skilled industrial labor. So then financial strain, basically getting into debt, who would have thought? Rearmament was financed partly through deficits and devices such as MEFO bills, which allowed the government to conceal a large portion of military borrowing. This could support a rapid buildup for several years, but it was not a permanently sustainable financial model. The regime increasingly needed either tighter civilian austerity, inflationary pressure, higher taxation, or external resources. Then, administrative chaos. The economy was not a neatly planned machine. Ministries, the armed services, Hermann Göring's four-year plan, organization, party offices, industrial firms, and regional authorities often competed for labor, steel, fuel, transport, and investment. Hitler deliberately tolerated overlapping jurisdictions. Politically, this helped him dominate subordinates. Economically, it created waste and duplication. Look at the ammo production during the Nazi era. It was terrible compared to what it could have been because of all this chaos and all this.
Oh yeah, they produced more
choices.
ammunition in World War One. I think Germany did.
Yeah, so this is why a fascist planned economy can become dumb as F. It's just not necessarily
same problems you're going to find in China and Russia, and now that Russia's under attack, it's going to be interesting to see how it plays out. But anyway, the Russians are talking about mobilizing another 800,000 men, which is a tribute to the blindness and the disconnected nature of modern leadership. People in positions of power now, they don't have the education Stalin was reading constantly. If you go to Kotkin's biography of Stalin, he had this huge library in the Kremlin, and he was always in it, always reading, right? I'm sure that's not the case with Putin. I'm sure it's not. And same thing with Trump. I think that same thing with Netanyahu in Israel. I think there's a problem. I think our leaders are more corrupt. They're not as well informed. They're not as well educated. Their minds, they haven't refined their minds. And that's a problem for the rest of us because we have to live through their mistakes. And then the public man, now when citizenship is an obligation and we're living in republics, to vote, to be informed, to vote for the right person. Look at the frauds we have in our political system here in America. I think you have a pretty decent chancellor this time around, but I think Angela Merkel was a fraud. I think all the chancellors you've had since the Cold War have been frauds. Maybe Merz is the first one that's not. You can comment on it or not, but it's politicians are largely just You
what
know
are the
they're
only
lying
two?
because their mouths are
Yeah,
moving, right?
yeah. What are the? I mean, after the Cold War, I mean the chancellors that we had, Schröder, super close to Putin. I mean, really, really
Oh,
close,
sure, yeah.
close to
And look
Putin.
at who he's working for Gazprom after he leaves the
Yeah,
chancellorship.
Angela
Yeah.
Merkel was raised in Angela Merkel
East Germany,
was raised in
East
East
Germany. Yeah.
communist East Germany. There's like this whole chaotic backstory about her, um, and so yeah, so this was a huge thing, and so people get frustrated now because the money's gone, huge amount of debt. The economy is not working anymore. We spend too much on climate change and foreigners. So now there's an affordability crisis here. And guess what? The two new parties are the only meaningful two new parties are that have some sort of a weight. It's a super right wing party and it's a super left wing party. So again, it's like the peasants, the peasants. They think that what are we gonna do? We're just gonna try communism again. We're just gonna vote communist, or we're gonna just go super duper mega right wing, and maybe that's gonna fix it. That's gonna fix everything. And of course, the super right wing party and that new super left wing party, both the left party and the right party, they're very closely associated with Russia. Guess how that happens, right? So, and then you have sort of a kind of a partial overlap between, when it comes to these issues, a partial overlap between the U.S. and Russia, which is the technocracy, the technocracy way of thinking, right? So this is when Elon and his friends, Peter Thiel and others, there was some connections to Alexander Dugin from the Russian side. There's like this whole dark movement going on where they sort of claim traditionalism. I mean, Dugin does that all the time. But look at Russia. They thrive on anybody who's smart over there. Anybody who could be turned into an engineer to develop the next weapon or the next poison gas or the next super virus, and nanotech and all that stuff. So Russia depends on technology, all of it, and so there's this technocratic thought. And some people actually believe that you can bring these strains back together, right? Maybe you could create this meta ideology to bring all these different previous ideologies back together. Yeah, so you have a planned economy element, so to placate some of the fascists and the communists. You have a green element to technocracy. Saving the planet. That's always a deciding factor. So proponents claim. So it has to be like an ecological equilibrium. And it's for Elon, it's about discovering new worlds, conquering new planets, spreading life on new planets. So that sounds very green, very eco. Turning a barren planet into a living habitat. And there's going to be numbers. There's going to be costs and effort, and all these things are measured. So this is going to placate people that are into an economy, into numbers and supply and demand. But it's supposed to be like an authoritarian system, where the leadership, the wise men, the scientists, and their computers, which is like an old oracle, it's just like a modern form of an ancient oracle, they decide who does what, who gets what. And they have sort of a plan for you, right? You get born, if you're allowed to get born, you get assigned a budget for life. How much CO2 you're going to emit, or depending on the IQ levels of your parents, you're going to be limited to certain jobs. And they have all that planned out for you. Because if you grow up and you try to figure out your life, the world, and you try out different things before you end up with something, that's wasteful. But in technocracy, there's no waste, it is claimed. They use their supercomputer and they figure out what your life is going to be, they say. And don't worry, because free money, free resources. So who could argue with that, they say. That's kind of like being a perpetual child. And the technocrats, they're the parents in this dysfunctional family, and you get free stuff, but you don't have a say. This is kind of like the technocracy promise of salvation to get us out of the affordability crisis. And there have been some early proponents or some early technocrats like Francis Bacon. He lived from 1561 to 1626. His unfinished work, New Atlantis, describes the fictional island and they have a large organized scientific establishment whose members systematically investigate nature, conduct experiments, acquire foreign knowledge, and transform discoveries into useful technologies. So, So modern scholarship explicitly sees New Atlantis as anticipating the organized research institution. Bacon's ideas subsequently influenced the milieu from which the Royal Society emerged. And the Royal Society in the early stages was very, very esoteric, very much into the occult, very Rosicrucian. They believed a lot of nonsense. And then with the new kings, starting with George I, it was kind of split in two parts. So the Royal Society itself was more strictly scientific, and the sister organization that was created was English or British Freemasonry, which was supposed to be like the spiritual group, but there was no 100% distinction between those two. So the scientists, it was, as a leading scientist, you were kind of expected to become a Freemason, right? So there was still overlap in this, and most people don't know that Freemasonry, or the original Freemasonry, has a very strong scientific component. And it's also a magical component, because they don't really make much of a difference when it comes to that. So, so then, of course, after Bacon, you had industry, and the science evolved, the science matured, and so a lot. And so the idea emerged that social problems could be treated rather like engineering problems. Some of these problems can be treated like engineering problems, some cannot. And so at some point, the left was getting onto this. This was with the Fabian Society. This was also Britain. Founded in Britain in 1884. And so the Fabians did not generally demand an immediate revolutionary dictatorship of engineers. Their strategy was gradualist. They believed society could be rationally reconstructed through legislation, administration, social research, and professional expertise. So these members like Sidney and Beatrice Webb. So they wanted to use science for a left-wing control. And it was very much an element of modern communism that the Marxism came first. Other science was secondary. And if science was contradicting Marx, then Marx was right. So there was like this pecking order, or this hierarchy. So science was bent to serve communism, or to verbally support communism, even though you disregarded science, you disregarded evidence. So then you had people like H.G. Wells, again, the Anglo realm. Um, so this is when the modern dream became more fanatical. So they said scientists know how the world actually works. Therefore, scientists or scientifically trained administrators should have substantially more political power. Thorstein Veblen said, "Take power away from businessmen." He discussed a Soviet of technicians. A Soviet, of course, meaning council. So that was his idea. And technocracy movement acquired its most distinctive form during the Great Depression under Howard Scott. Again, an affordability crisis. So prices were high, people didn't have money. So then the movement presented itself as a salvation, technocracy. So this was Howard Scott and others. Scott and Associates argued that North America's industrial machinery had become capable of producing abundance, but the monetary price system prevented rational distribution. Technocracy therefore proposed something extraordinarily radical. Instead of allowing markets and money to determine economic allocation, technicians would calculate the physical productive capability of the continent. So you would split up in your administration, energy, materials, industrial, transport, human requirements, and so they proposed a structure called the technate. The goal was not conventional socialism, in which politicians nationalized factories and ran them through ministries. They wanted technical management, right? But when you have a problematic group, Jeff, when you have a problematic group running a technocratic system, this leading group, they could pretend to be scientists, right? They could give each other titles and degrees, or they could have the universities give them degrees. They could steal other people's research and say, that's our research, I'm the leading scientist, I'm the smartest guy in the world, so therefore I rule. How do you get out of this bind? How do you get out of this problem? I mean, we cannot really... It's super hard to tell how essential Elon Musk has been. Because some people say he's ultra smart. He's an ultra genius. Other people think he's not a genius at all. And so this technocracy thing. I mean, at what point? At what point do these flaws in this concept become obvious? When people can just fake being scientists because they have the power in the system, right?
Yeah, well, that's the thing about bureaucratized science. People get a rubber stamp on their forehead saying scientists because they jump through hoops. You got Fauci. What did he pled the fifth 50 times before
100
Congress?
times.
Was it 100 times?
I think it was 100 times or something.
Oh my gosh. He's serving. He was one of the highest paid bureaucrat in America, and very long serving since the 1970s in that bureaucratic system, supposedly a scientist. But look what he did. All kinds of bogus things that are so egregious that he dares not, that he would be in threat of going to jail if he answered honestly, right? That's how bad it is for Fauci.
Yeah, and also we saw, I think, especially with COVID and Fauci, we saw that that sometimes different sciences overlap, right? So you got the whole field of biology and biochemistry,
Overlap
and all
with chemistry, yeah.
virology, but then it's a security issue. There's
Yes,
it overlaps with another scientific field, which is security. Now you're dealing
and
with
military
biological.
science, because
Yeah,
it could be an attack from
yeah.
another
So
country.
now you're dealing with a whole different field. This is like military intelligence and biological weapons. I'm like, well, this is different from regular virology, right? So
And he was not even equipped to do the basic job, where all these other things were actually part of his job, because he was technically the guy responsible for our reaction in a biological attack, and he
yeah,
couldn't find his butt with both hands.
yeah. And so this is when we get to the reality of this, when somebody is out of his depth, somebody is out of his league.
And there's the
When
claims by some of his colleagues, former colleagues, that of corruption, or one of his former colleagues. I don't know how credible she is, and there's been the books about how he handled the AIDS crisis in the 80s, that outlined what they believed was his corruption. Of course, proof, evidence. Well, he took the fifth how many times again? 100 times? Yeah, I think there's something, this is
well,
where corruption, and the Third Reich, which was this big fascist bureaucracy, massively corrupt, right? This is people don't realize, oh, they think Hitler was honest. They think the
yeah,
Nazis were, at
let's
least
not
they were
forget.
crazy, but they were honest, but they
Let's not
weren't.
yeah, let's not forget that Hitler always believed he was smarter than everybody. He was constantly uh he was constantly assuming that he was better than the scientists, right? Because he could see the essence of a topic, and he would just
But
make a
he had a
decision.
tremendous memory, that guy. That the
Yeah,
thing that allowed him
yeah,
to bully people was they just couldn't remember the way he did.
yeah.
He
He
had
could
a
remember
memory.
he could remember trivia very well. But uh, it's like when you have when you have like a Fauci who's part of a chain of command, right? There's overlapping chains of command, and so when somebody higher up makes the plans and gives the orders, they have to hand down the orders to the next lower guy, which may be Fauci in this instant, and they give Fauci enough information to do his daily work, but not more information, right? Because there's decisions that are way above Fauci's pay grade and expertise. So they need somebody in Fauci's role who will just follow orders, right? See, that's the problem with science oftentimes, when they would prefer a guy who says yes all the time, and they could replace him if he said no. They could replace him if he asked too many questions. Why are we funneling money again to the Chinese? Oh, you don't have to know. You could guess. Oh, maybe we're not so dumb in the intelligence community. We're giving money to the Chinese. We're selling them equipment through firms like Thermo Fisher, and we're getting data from the Chinese back. So China and we feel more comfortable in terms of biosecurity. Of course, we're spying on the Chinese, but they're spying on us. So we keep that in an equilibrium, because but that's more safe than just being closed, walled up, and they wall up, and we got this under control. So Fauci or whatever, just do what we tell you to do. Funnel that money, plead the fifth, don't ask many questions. We'll protect you as long as you shut the F up. But we need people to ask questions. We need people to question, hey, these higher ups, do they really have it under control? Do they really keep an equilibrium of safety, or is this going to go all south? Is this going to end up in a big freaking disaster? See, that's the thing. And so with the with this whole technocracy thing, I mean Elon, the whole construct of Elon Musk is based on these large institutional investors, and it's built on Tesla, and they're just making electric cars. Not that cheap electric cars. I mean, the Model 3 is not that expensive. The Model Y is decently priced. The more expensive Model S, I think they're not making that anymore, and the Model X, they don't make it anymore. And the Cybertruck was a flop because it was so darn expensive. I mean, who buys a $100,000 truck or a $120,000 truck? Who's gonna buy that? And it's just electric cars, right? It's everybody can make electric cars. The Chinese are making electric cars. The Germans are making electric cars. It's not. Oh my God, Elon should rule the world because one of his firms can make electric cars. I mean, the special thing about SpaceX was reducing the costs dramatically. But, private enterprise has been known to be more efficient than government. So, again, that's not an argument to say people like Elon should run the world because they made something cheaper than, the government could make it. Again, it's very it's a bag of promises that people are given, and I'm always I always tell people to be optimistic, but not in a manipulated way, because all these movements they are like mood stabilizers, right? People are leftists because it stabilizes their mood sometimes, but like with most mood stabilizers, it increases the problem it's supposed to cure. So same with technocracy. Some people, they like to believe in the magic that there's going to be free money, and all that kind of stuff. I mean, let's not forget when the Black Death happened in Europe. It was like, what was it, around the year 1400, roundabout. A lot of Europeans died because we didn't have the science, we didn't have enough of it. Some Italian republics actually imposed a quarantine, which was very well chosen. But overall, people didn't have enough science, so a lot of people died from the Black Death. And then those who survived, their life became more affordable for them because their work was more in demand and there was more to go around. So the money or the resources that were available to the common people, they were divided up amongst fewer people. So it was more for the individual. So we may get to see some of these promises, but maybe after a new super pandemic. And so there's less people there. So because somebody messed up something and didn't watch the Chinese enough, or something escaped from a lab, or somebody didn't really check on these fur farms or meat markets enough, and so then a billion people dies, or 2 billion, 3 billion people die, and then it's like, oh, it has benefits too. There's more money going around for the individual. But there's something about coming from peasant serfdom to enlightenment and capitalism, and then what's next? What are we being lured into next by some of these people? This ecological technocracy? Is it a rollback of the benefits that we got during the Enlightenment and capitalism? Because if you think about it, the system has enough scientists now, enough special schools now, super hedge funds, they got resources. A lot of people are not needed anymore. And so this is kind of like the old eugenics idea. You get rid of those with a lower IQ or an average IQ, and you just keep those around who are smarter. That's also something that some of these technocrats are infatuated with. Some of this eugenics idea, which is also tied to elite green eco thought. Because you think about it, the Worldwide Fund for Nature, the 1001 Club, very establishment, very green. It's not just young kids and Greta Thunberg. It's also very, very elite people involved in that. The Nazis had a green thing. The Nazis were pretty green too. So yeah, so it seems more like some of this technocracy stuff to me looks like not so much like a progress to an improved state of the economy in the world, more like let's roll things back. So let's have more medieval type elements, because now we have the scientists, now we have the money, now we have the knowledge, now we have the resources. We just don't need many people anymore. Why do we need these 100 IQ people for, right?
Yeah, well, well, that's what. See, the devaluing of human beings, because human beings, they run the gamut from people who are slow, who are people who are very quick witted, um, and they all, in the way society was developed, and this is what class was originally supposed to be about. Your best people were to be the guides, and the people who weren't as slow were to be the followers, right? This was the ideal arrangement. It was good for the people who aren't really able to think for themselves, and it helps society as a whole to survive. But now everybody's equal, right? You can't say that somebody is, and in terms of social equality, but the fact is people aren't born with equal abilities or traits. I'm never going to be in the NBA, right?
Yeah.
And then you have age. As you get older, there's things you can't do that you could do when you're younger. There's things when you're younger you can't do when you're older, as young people sometimes complain. So it's like life is this mix, and it's all about adjusting to it with the right attitude. But so did we pretty much cover our material today?
Yeah, I think so. I think so. This is like as I said, I'm working on a project that gets into the American elites from the very very beginning, especially those who couldn't wait to betray the revolution or just to subvert the revolution from the first moment onwards, and kind of like the context of the time, when winning was everything. You had to defend against competitors. You had to plan ahead. Winning was everything. And so that led to a dramatic increase in organization, networks, markets, profits, and just expansion, and then the industrialization. So I'm mapping the phases of the American elites, from the tobacco planting, when that was a big thing, sugar plantations, then the stage after stage after stage, up until today, and to tell people where these problems of today come from. There was this drive to win. You had to win. You had to compete with these other empires. And that competition made a lot of these things possible that are useful for us, even for average people. But it also created sort of a very dark dynamic among elites. Not everybody, but kind of this mixture of pathology and occultism, and people trying to continue some of the worst mystery cults from the ancient world. And it became too dark, too greedy, and it set off in motion this perpetual cycle of, we don't trust the peasants, so we have to weaken the peasants. But if you weaken the peasants, they become worse, so we can trust them even less, because the peasants become unhinged and bad, and they will choose bad things, and they will burn everything down if you let them. And they're oftentimes not moral at all. They're not better than the elites if they get power.
People are good and bad, indifferent of their
Yeah,
class.
and so I'm trying to map this, especially with the intelligence side, the secret side, the secret organizations, the secret networks, to show a way out of this that is not what we've seen so far. Oh, let's try technocracy, let's try fascism, let's try burn it all down, let's try communism and blah blah blah, or let's try doing things, continuing as we've always done things, right? So just to show people a way out of this, which is not just an affordability crisis, but an everything crisis. It's like, if you think the affordability crisis is bad, World War III
Wait,
could be
wait,
much worse. The next
wait till
pandemic could be
Russia
much worse.
mobilizes 800,000 troops in
Yeah,
September,
yeah,
and we're all on the edge of World War III. And wait until all the oil reserves of Europe and Japan are out because the Strait of Hormuz is closed and Trump can't open it. He doesn't
yeah,
know how.
yeah.
Yeah, that's where we are, folks. All right. Well, I guess that's it, huh? We're all done.
Yeah,
Thanks
so
for joining us, folks. Yeah.
yeah, people just one last little bit here. So don't fight too much with each other. There's too many different individuals and situations. It's like everybody has his own perspective. There's lazy people, there's good people, there's people with bad luck, there's people who had too much good luck. It's just it's such a touchy subject, and just try to work with each other, because the last thing we need is to use the amplification power of the internet so we can divide ourselves even more to be conquered more.
Yeah, and for those, some young lady was attacking boomers, and how her generation is poor, but we all start out poor. In my generation, all my friends were out working at McDonald's, but what I said to her is, I said, look, 77% of boomers own their houses. Well, who do you think are going to inherit those houses? I mean,
Hmm.
when you're old and you've paid off your house and you're retired, your children who are not boomers are going to get your houses, and your grandchildren are. So all that stuff is coming to you. Just be patient.
Yeah, don't burn everything down, please.
So thank you for joining us. I'm Jeff Nyquist. I'm in North America. My co-host is Alex Benesch. He's in Germany. I hope you'll join us next week for another discussion.